it not easy to live in this world and to be on guard with how we use our words and how we live out the decisions we make almost every day? It is a challenge. And so it was no mistake that Jesus used this parable about the steward to kind of convey to his disciples and all of those people who had gathered to hear what he had to say that we need to be prudent in our behaviors. My favorite example comes out of my college years when I was taking a philosophy class with the dean of the college. And I needed a certain book which was not in the library. And it happened to be in his library, but it was a very unusual copy. And so we made arrangements that I should be able to use this book in preparation for a paper I had to write. But the admonition was, be sure that nothing happens to it. Unbeknownst to me, while I was in class, my beagle decided to chew on this book. When I got home, you can imagine how I felt. What am I going to do? What will I say? Well, I did not handle it very well because the college was in a fairly small community. And so every time I saw the dean of the college on one side of the street, I walked on the other side of the street, avoiding having to deal with this situation. That actually went on for some time, until finally I couldn't stand it anymore. And so I went to his office and I said, listen, I'm sorry that my dog chewed on the corners of this book, but I need to get it back to you. I handed it to him. He looked at it. He said, well, this damage isn't so bad. Don't worry about it. All of that time, I had been stressing about what would I do and what would I say. You know, grace has a way of somehow making right that which has been so out of sync. And so, what a relief I felt, because this professor and the dean of the school, my greatest fear was he'd say, you're out of here. But he didn't. He said, I think this will be all right. And he took the book and put it back in his library. Friends, it isn't easy to live in this world because all of us, and not one of us is an exception. We have said things that we wish we could retrieve. We have made decisions that have impacted others that we wish we could take back. But that's not the way the life works, is it? Once it's out, once it's done, that's the current reality. And how are we going to deal with it? Well, this account in the Gospel of Luke isn't just about a steward who has been misusing his role as a keeper of the master's resources. It really is a wake-up call to all of us that we have charge of the master's resources, each and every one of us. It's not as if God hasn't given us that which we need to be careful with. All of us have been given a gift that requires care, not just for ourselves, but for other people as well. Think about it, if you will, in terms of what a precious gift this is. I have said so many times to us as we gather for worship that the only thing you really have which is yours, not the clothes on your back, not the car that you're driving, not the house in which you live, not the shoes on your feet. The only thing you have is your gift of life. And the truth of it is, that's true for the people who sit next to you and with whom you rub shoulders day in and day out. The only thing that you have, which God has given you, that has eternal purpose, meaning, and consequences, is your life. And so the words we use as we talk with one another really do have import. We need to be care-filled with one another. We live in a world right now which seems to believe that the only way to exist and get ahead is to divide and to conquer. We aren't seeing too many bridges built, bridges of understanding, bridges of compassion, bridges of cooperation. Those things seem to have somehow faded into the background. As people begin to vie for position and power, words are spoken that are hurtful and have long-range consequences in terms of how people see each other. We have deeds that are done which are simply unacceptable in terms of what we believe is the highest goal of our culture and our society. And they happen almost on a daily basis. This gift that we have been given means that if we take it seriously and we take it to heart, it means that we are careful with one another. We are careful with ourselves. Because the problem is that once we say or do something that impacts or diminishes another person, it diminishes us as well. It's not that somehow we skate on oblivious to what has happened to someone else. If we are persons of conscience, if we are persons of faith, then we realize that the word we spoke cannot be taken back. And how do we make amends? You know, I'm very intrigued by the athletic world and the public exposure that people have. And when they make a mistake or an error in judgment, they feel like they have to come on the news media and say, "I'm sorry." I always wonder what the depth of that is. Is it just that these are words that we throw around so casually and carelessly? Oh yes, that happened. I just want you to know that I am sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anybody. My question always is, how does that impact the rest of your life? If it does not significantly make some kind of change in the way you move from that moment on into your future, those words are empty. They mean absolutely nothing except public posturing. And we've heard this so many times in the last few years. People who are in positions of influence or people who are noteworthy in terms of some accomplishment in their lives, they make a mistake in judgment and behavior or words. And all of it, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." But if you didn't mean it, what is the result of that confession? When one says, "I'm sorry," it's a confession. A confession of my own guilt and my own responsibility. And what do I then do with that? For example, if I had to borrow another book from my professor, it would not be in a place where the dog could get at it. You change, you do things differently. And that's so very true. None of us are going to go through life exempt from having sometimes said a word that hurts another person. Even in our best intentions, there are times when it just pops out, but you can't take it back. Or sometimes there are things we do without being aware that they're going to impact somebody not too far away from us negatively. You can't take it back. So if there is a true sense of repentance, it means you change the way you speak and the way you act. What will happen with the next event that occurs in our culture where somebody transgresses and says, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry"? Look to see how it impacts the way they live from that moment on. I think of our Olympic athletes in particular. You know, this Lochte said, after having gotten drunk and damaged some stuff in the gas station in Brazil, in Rio, at first denied that it happened, and then, because he can no longer avoid it, he has to confess. Now let's watch what happens. Not because we want to judge, but because with true repentance, it means a change in lifestyle. Or I think about that young man who was in an auto accident and killed so many people. He's underage, and his mother takes him to Mexico. But what does she do before that? The boy is seen in a drunken party with his friends, jumping on a table to crash it to the floor after he has killed people while driving while intoxicated. You see, friends, if you truly have a sense of repentance and sorrow, then you change the pattern of your life. Or I think right now about the great push for rehabbing drug addicts. You put them in an institution and they become clean. And what do? Go right back to the same setting, the same circumstances that led them into this situation to begin with. You see, it's difficult to somehow overcome those kinds of things that happen when we speak or do words or deeds that hurt other people. Jesus was telling the disciples about this parable because this man was clever enough to find a way to ingratiate himself, even though he lost his job. But he knew he couldn't dig ditches. He wasn't fit to do that. And he wasn't about to beg. He wouldn't go on the street corner and ask for alms from people. So what do? Well, he did what was expedient for him to do at the moment. And he made arrangements with all the debtors of this landowner to reduce their debt and to ingratiate them to him. Well, it's not a process that I recommend to us. But what it does remind us is that words and deeds matter. In little things, friends, just in little things. It doesn't have to be some great momentous thing, but sometimes we let our irritations pop to the surface, and it comes out in a word we say that we wish we hadn't said. Or sometimes we're not paying attention. And all of a sudden, there it is in front of us, and our reaction is doing the wrong thing. So as we think about our journey as people of faith, it's important to be aware that what we say and what we do truly does matter. Now, when Paul was writing to Timothy, Paul realizes that his early life as a Pharisee was counterproductive. He has said in almost every one of his letters to the churches, and especially to Timothy, that he was an enemy of Jesus Christ. And he did whatever in his power he could do to undermine the way of Christ until the road of Damascus and a light came. It's like in our comic strips, a light bulb suddenly goes on. And Paul began to see what he had never seen before. He didn't go back to a way of life. He went on to a new way of life. And that new way of life impacted thousands and thousands of people in every generation because he knew that his deeds and his words before that Damascus Road experience, it was an opportunity for him to express his regret, but to embrace a whole new way of life. We don't hear much about Paul going back to Jerusalem to sit around with the Pharisees and talk about the law anymore. What we hear about Paul is that he was busy moving throughout Asia Minor, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ to those who would hear. And lives were transformed and lives were changed. So the hope for us is that when we say a word that hurts, or when we do a deed that hurts, it doesn't have to be the last word. If it changes our lives for the better, and that's how grace works, that's how God works, then we move into a new future and new kinds of relationships. And isn't that the heart of our faith journeys? God does not hold against us yesterday. If we truly say, I'm sorry, I want to move in a new direction. God's grace is always there, always waiting for us to express that truth. And then we move into a new way of being. Thank God that he did not leave Paul in the position of undermining the work of Jesus Christ. Thank God that he equipped Paul to live in such a way that generations have benefited from his words and his deeds. May God find that true of all.